Great. So welcome everybody. So this session, it's in two parts. The first hour is going to be looking at how to find tree planting plots. And then the second session is a kind of West Midlands feedback. I'm just wondering if you're got your microphone on, it might be an idea to turn it off just so we don't get all the background noises, although it is lovely hearing dogs and cats and radios and everything. Okay, so I think it's over to you then, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. So yeah, as some of you have been aware, we've been doing a lot of there's been a lot of tree planting been going on over the past number of years, probably since about 2006 with Birmingham Trees for Life. They've been delivering a lot of tree planting across the city in parks and open spaces and starting on some housing land as well. So Justine knows all about that because she's currently writing up the report at the moment. But over the years, they've planted around 100,000 trees across the city. So they've been doing sterling work out there. But the baton's being handed over to us to pick up now. So we're going to be moving forward with tree planting in the city. But we know that a lot of the easy locations have started to dry up. So we're having to look more carefully about where we can start planting trees. It's going to be a bit more scattered. But we're also going to be using some of the data that we're producing on priority planting locations. So I'm just going to share my screen. So the first bit will be a little bit about where we're how we're getting to these tree planting locations. So I think we've shared with you before the tree canopy cover mapping that we've been doing and how we've been using that data towards identifying where we get towards tree equity.
Simon, there's nothing coming up on the screen.
Nothing coming up on your screen.
It's there now.
Oh, it's there now, right, okay. It's taking a bit longer on my end then. Okay, so yeah, so we've been working on this tree planting priority platform. Why is that not advancing through slides? There we go. So that planting platform really is trying to build on the basis that we know what the challenges are in Birmingham. So we've got a population of 1.1 million and rising, one of the youngest populations in Europe. Significant number of our wards are in the top 10 percentile of in-season multiple deprivation. High levels of years life lost in certain areas. We've got air pollution, urban heat island, pluvial and fluvial flooding, and demand for housing. So that's all putting pressure on the urban environment and putting pressure on people, with these mental health and well-being issues. And obviously, having been through the COVID pandemic, although it's still sort of with us, that's definitely brought to the fore the inequality of accessible green space. And we know as well that from the demographics of the city that those minority ethnic groups are generally more impacted by the pandemic because they live in areas of low green infrastructure, poor air quality and high urban heat island. So they weren't necessarily able to get out and enjoy those urban green spaces as some of the rest of us were able to do. So when we just look at our canopy cover for the city, we've derived this from the UK National Tree Map and land area, but we've also factored in some exclusions. So things like we've removed the amount of water bodies from and dedicated sporting areas, football stadiums, cricket, that kind of thing, and some designated nature conservation sites. So when we're considering about what our overall canopy cover is and what we can achieve. So overall, we're somewhere around 18.6% canopy cover across the city, but with those excluded areas, that increases to sort of into the 20%. So that's taking up an amount of the land area. If we look at this though, we can see here we've got canopy cover by constituency and by ward. So the constituencies are those parliamentary areas. So when we look at the constituency map, we can see that we've got some quite dark green areas there. To the north, we've got Sutton, which is showing sort of in the high 40% canopy cover. And then we've got places like Edgbaston through into Quinton. But you can see that the big band across the middle of the city that's covering places like Ashton, Stetchford, Shard End, Erdington, Gravelly Hill, that's showing us quite low canopy cover. So in that sort of region of 10%. But that doesn't necessarily paint the best accurate picture that we need. So we can look at a finer grain. So we've got the ward level maps, which is the next one on the right-hand side. So that's showing the 69 wards of the city. And you can see when you compare Sutton the Sutton area on in the constituency, but compared with the ward, you can see that not all of those wards are at the same level of canopy cover as it is shown in constituency. So there is variations there, and you can see even again within that area that was very light coloured across Aston and Erdington, that we are getting variation between wards there. But we need to break that down even further still. So this is the map that we're using now to be identifying where we need to target tree planting most. And this is based on the lower super output areas. Now, those are areas that are used by the Office of National Statistics. They're the smallest unit for those, and they cover approximately 1,000 to 1,500 residents or 650 households. And we've gone from 10 constituencies to 69 wards, now down to 639 lower super output areas or neighbourhoods, I suppose those will be. So, and we can see here, when we're breaking this down again, we've got some particularly good quality high canopy areas here along the edge of the city, but that is out into the green belt. This larger piece in the north of Sutton, hopefully you can see my pointer, is Sutton Park, so that's pretty high. We're going to have things like Hilltop out here, so that's the Hilltop and Sandwell Valley area. And again, when we're getting into the city centre, we can see that there's subtle variations there. There's some areas which are particularly low. Just I think quite where that is. Aston, so that's going to be coming into the back end of Ladywood, I think, somewhere around there. And then we're going out through into Borsley and Highgate around here, so there's little variations. So we've got the canopy cover map, and that's giving us one indication of where we need to be prioritising our tree planting going forward. But that's not the full picture. We've already mentioned about the impacts on human health from things like urban heat island, and we know that trees and green infrastructure can provide significant urban cooling effects. So we need to be looking at how we can perhaps play a part in dealing with urban heat island. The same goes for air quality. So although trees can sometimes exacerbate the impacts of air quality, especially when we've got lots of tall buildings and closed canopy and vehicles travelling underneath them, in the suburbs or where we've got lower buildings, the trees help produce a roughness of the terrain, so they help mix the air together. They create as the wind's blowing, it creates turbulence, and that helps dissipate areas of high pollution. So as they say, for air and for water, dilution is a solution to pollution. So as you're mixing this all together, it's diluting it down, it's spreading that particulate matter or those gases out across a wider area. And again, flooding was another aspect as well that we were looking at. So we'll be able to see that we know that for instance, we've got the River Tame that flows across from west to east, but we've also got a lot of river corridors and tributaries that run through places like Woodgate through into the River Ray from the south upwards, the River Cole running through East Birmingham and out into Solihull. There's lots of places that we could be planting that's going to be beneficial to dealing with things like stormwater interception and air quality. So we've taken those data sets and we've overlaid those, and this is the sort of map that we're getting now. I think we have shown this before. So this is then taking that map and taking those data sets on areas of existing tree canopy, impervious surface, air quality, urban heat island, stormwater reduction, and also the indices of multiple deprivation as well, to give this map. Depending on the priority that we give to any of these factors, the map changes colour slightly. So the areas that would be most benefited by interventions, green infrastructure interventions, showing up red based on the priorities that we've got there. And we can see as we do this, we can filter by site suitability. That brings us down to a selection of neighbourhoods. So those are those LSOAs, and those, like I said, were the ones that we should be prioritising for planting based on the factors that we've put in. We can also see how those areas rank as well across the city. So based on those factors here, we've got one of the wards, one of the LSOAs up in Bromford and Hodge Hill, which is ranked first out of 639. Unfortunately, in this instance, being first is not best. First is definitely the worst on that. So that's based on all of these indices multiple deprivation as well. So we can see how we've got all these are ranked on there. So yeah, so not necessarily a really useful tool for us. It does show some significant issues in some places, and some of these areas are going to be particularly difficult for us to get trees and green infrastructure into. So we're going to have to do some more testing and trialing about how we can prioritize some of these areas. In terms of dealing with those issues, though, we can move on through our tool and we can look at how many trees we might need to be planting in order to tackle those issues. So we can select here, we've got within the tool, we can select our expected our projected canopy cover. So if we want to achieve a particular canopy cover percentage, or we can increase the canopy by a given percent. So we might decide that actually over the next 5 years, we're going to try and increase the canopy in these areas by 5% or 10%, 20%. As we've discussed previously, considering climate change and the impacts of that, it's expected that most cities are going to require something in the region of 25% or upwards canopy cover in order to deal with those impacts. And as any of us were out and about yesterday will know that it was quite a hot day, and if you were in the shade of a tree, it was significantly more comfortable than it was if you were just out in the middle of the stark open area. So if you were walking through the middle of the town, Centenary Square or anything like that, I can imagine it was pretty hot with all that open sky, reflected heat, and few trees about. So we can also input there as well the average tree crown diameter at maturity, and we can also think about mortality rate. Just on this slide here, we've not put anything in for mortality rate at all, but we can apply that scenario, and it gives us in this little right hand box down here, gives us the number of trees that we would need to be planting in order to meet either that canopy percentage target or the increase in canopy. The tool also allows us to look at things like the carbon sequestration rates as well from those trees. So we can see the amount of carbon monetary benefits from the trees that are already there and what it will be modelled based on adding 34,000 trees to that area, and then what the net benefit is as well. So this is just one element of the ecosystem services. So this is giving us an additional £89,000 of monetary benefit per year, and those trees will be looking to sequester somewhere around 1,200,000 kilograms of carbon over their lifetime. So this is a really useful tool in terms of either the City Council securing budgets for tree planting, or for us as an organisation going out looking to fundraise. We can use this data to show positive benefits from what we're doing. We're not just saying we want to go and plant trees, but we can say why we want to plant trees, where we need to plant trees, and what those benefits are going to mean. We have been doing this, but previously, so we have been able to sort of say, well, we know these areas are a low canopy cover, but this is quite a good visual way of seeing what we're doing going forwards. However, that bit of data there is only one part of what we need to do. And we're going to have to look at how we identify sites within those areas, those priority areas, and do some planting site assessment as well. This is part of what we wanted to talk about today. So let's go to the first slide. So we've already looked at the mapping to see where those priority areas are. And what we can do is we can zoom in quite a long way into that mapping and then overlay that on aerial images, so Google Maps or Esri Maps. And here we can see we've got an area which is actually split into three zones. We've got this one, is Bordesley Green East, and we've got Bordesley Green East Road here. We've got Alcombe Grove, and then we've got down here Church Green. We can see the existing trees in this location, but we can also see areas where there are no trees as well. So sort of around here, there might be some space on the central reservation. We can see that there are back gardens, but they're perhaps a bit outside our scope at the moment. Looking a bit particularly bare down here in this bottom sort of central section. Looks like there might be some new houses down there, and somebody's also got some solar panels on the roof as well, I can see. So say we were looking to target planting trees in this area around Oldcombe Grove and this section here. So we can see some possible planting locations here. Now, because we're working in conjunction with the City Council, we're able to get access to their land ownership data. So the City Council has a GIS mapping platform that they use, which contains all their land ownership data. So it colours the land in by the different departments or directorates that have management responsibility for that area. And this is sort of a typical view of what that looks like. So this is again Oldcombe Grove here. This was that piece of land that we said was potentially possible for planting space. And this blue stipple here tells us that this land is in housing ownership. So the housing department. So this is social housing, or this would be council houses with communal garden spaces. We've got probably individual council houses down here, probably with private gardens. We've also overlaid this as well with the 2019 national tree map as well. So these are just regularized shapes for the tree crowns. Obviously the tree crowns are irregular shapes, but just on this mapping here, we've been able to just put them into a regular circular shape. So we can see where the trees are, and it also allows us to exactly see a bit better where trees aren't. So for us, it's going to be much easier to target where City Council own land to start off with, because that's just one organisation to deal with in terms of getting consent to plant on the land. And so we can be looking here. Move to the next slide. This is a little bit of map that we just generated from that same GIS layer, and this was putting some potential planting locations where we could see that there weren't trees. So we've used this circle with a black cross on, and this is sort of identifying, I suppose, perhaps a maximum number of trees that we might be able to get in an area, but we haven't got much data other than that. We can see some existing trees that are already managed by the council shown on this map as well. This map also shows us there's a TPO down here as well, because it's taken off the same map. So you can see there was a tree preservation order for that part there. So this is a good start. So we can see that, you know, I mean, at the moment we've got 240 trees that have been that are being dedicated to us to plant this winter. Those are going to come from the pollinations event that's going to be occurring in Victoria Square in August and September. But we'll also be having other funds come through to us as well from Birmingham Civic Society to be continuing the work of Trees for Life and doing planting there. So when we know how much funds are coming over, we'll know how many trees we need to find spaces for. But we've already got to start with finding space for 240 trees. So we need to start looking at, can actually we plant all of these locations, or are there some locations where actually they're not feasible at all? We can, part of our assessment will be looking to see what is already in the local area. So we know that we can start to see where the plantable locations are. We need to think about what species we might be able to be putting in there. So off our Treeplotter map, we can see what trees are in the public highway. Hopefully we'll get the parks trees added at some point. But we can see here we've got a range of different trees. We've got a couple of London planes, a couple of rowans, crab apples, Norway maple, alder. So there's a few common alder, a few crab apples. So we might want to consider thinking that this site might be suitable for smaller trees that are not maybe in the Rosaceae family, or maybe not alders, because we've already got a few there. We can also use a desk-based assessment to give us some other information as well. So off Google Maps, if you've never done it, you can right-click and select measure distance. You can put a point on the map, and you can measure out to a center point. You can measure distances and you can measure lengths quite well, even on irregular objects. So you can keep clicking, adding a point to give you a total length. But here we can see that if we were taking, say, a center point between these two buildings, which is probably the most likely location for tree planting, we're looking about 9.8 meters from the building. These distances to properties can be used to inform things like the maximum potential crown diameter at maturity. Obviously, we would want to be making sure that we can get the biggest tree in there as possible, but we also want to make sure that whatever we plant is not going to interfere with the building. So we need to think that, okay, this is maybe 18 meters across here, but we don't want to be planting a tree that's got a mature crown of 20 meters diameter, because that would be touching the buildings on each side. So we might be looking at something that has a 10-meter crown spread. So we might get 5 meters, that gives us 4 meters each side, or maybe 8 meters, which might be preferable on there. So we can think about that sort of size. If we were planting on the central reservation to the top, we could probably be looking at maybe something like 20 meters, because by the time it's grown up tall enough to get that spread, it'll actually be, the crown would be out and over any of the canopy, any of the carriageway there. We can think about like the issues with shading as well. So as a rough estimate, when we're doing things like development surveys for trees, we normally take the height of the tree and then plot that as a line and then an arc on a map to show the shadow path during, say, say one of the equinoxes, because you would think, obviously into the autumn, the shadow would be longer. In the summer, the shadows would be shorter, but it gives us an idea of where a shading arc would be. So we can use that sort of distance. So we think, well, actually, if the tree is going to reach 5 meters tall or 7 meters tall, then the arc of that shadow is going to be somewhere, probably on average, it's going to be 7 meters. We're going to get 7 meters worth of shadow through an average time. It's not going to be absolutely spot on. We are going to get shadows coming up the buildings, but it does mean that if we've got a tree that was 20 meters, we know that the front of these houses would be in shade a lot of the time, especially if we sort of run the path going round from east to west. So you get an arc that sort of comes, a semicircular arc that goes over the top. So actually most of the shadow will be out into that green space. We can also think about potential impacts through subsidence as well. So one of the things that we'll be doing is considering what the soils, what the underlying soil is, if we know, and identifying where we've got areas where we know that there are issues with subsidence through shrinkable clay. That would mean that in terms of species choice, we wouldn't necessarily wanting to plant high water demand species there. So those would be things like willows and poplars, but also things like some of the fruit trees as well. So pear trees, for example, take up a huge amount of water. And people don't think of that. But when you think about the amount of fruit that a pear tree can produce, most of that fruit is made up of water, and that's come from somewhere, and that's out the soil. So planting fruit trees close to houses on shrinkable soil is not a good idea. So these are things that we need to think about to try and avoid future issues. The other thing that we said on here that we can do from looking at aerial images is the other factors that can be picked up, but maybe not be visible on the ground, would be things like solar water heating and solar PV panels on rooftops. We just happen to have one on the edge here, but it's on the back of the building in this case. So if we were planting a tree on the street, it's not going to be impacting those solar panels. We can't really consider too much about what somebody might do in the future, but we can try and avoid any issues that we can see now. So, if we could see solar panels on the tops of this roof here, it may be that we consider what size trees we plant and the ultimate height. So we might be able to plant something that has a wideish crown, but doesn't get too tall in that space. Then the other part of the initial desk-based survey that we can do is just from Street View. Street View is incredibly useful. I do have to say though that it's always useful to look in the bottom right-hand corner, just have a look to see when the image capture date is. So this says image captured March 2022. So that's quite recent. So that's a good one. But some streets, the images might be 4, 5, 6 years old. And for those of you who live in Edgbaston and live on the Calthorpe estate, or live in Four Oaks maybe, they don't let the Google cars down their roads. So we don't get any street view images from those. So there's only so much you can do from street view. But this gives us a brief introduction or insight into what some of the other potential problems are. If I go back one, we can see here, we've got this 9 meters. It doesn't look like there's any obstructions there. But when we go to the street view, we can start to see that we've got things like this here. So we've got the telegraph pole, and we've got a lot of telephone wires running out across the space going to these properties. So that's going to give us some indication of maybe we need to consider what we can plant. We may be able to plant trees that come up between these wires. And although we don't really need to give a huge amount of consideration to these telephone wires, because really, if the tree starts to interfere with the wires, BT can come and reroute the cables through the crown of the tree rather than cutting the tree. It's always best to try and avoid the need to do any of that where we can. The next thing here we've got is lampposts as well. So this is a residential access path. It's leading through this estate. It's leading through to some houses at the end. We've got lighting on the street. We've got one lamppost here. I think there's another one further down the run there. So again, you know, if we were looking to plant trees, we'd want to make sure that we give some space to lampposts as well. So if we've got proposed a tree maybe here in the centre, we're now going to find that actually we need to offset that slightly. So instead of maybe 5 or 6 trees down this run, we might get 3 or 4, depending on what the spacing is going to be. We can also see that there are things like service runs. So here we've got an inspection chamber cover. We can see that there's been some digging of the pavement going sort of left to right on here, but there might also be some indication of this heading off down this pathway here. Further inspection chambers down there would probably give us an indication of the line of that run. Yeah, other things that you can look out for would be, you know, like fire hydrant posts that give you a distance. You might see BT chambers or stopcocks, those kind of things, or maybe little markers to show gas pipes where they're coming into buildings. All of these things are little clues as to the fact the service runs there. And those are things that we might need to mark on a map and then investigate further. So when we actually, before we come to plant, we might need to come out with what they call a CAT scanner and scan across there to try and locate where the surfaces are. So we walk across the area with the CAT scanner, and that will give us an indication as to where these surfaces might be and the depth as well. That's not to say that we can't plant there, it's just that we might not want to plant directly over the top. Other bits of clues that we can look for are things like this here. So we've got abandoned sofa here, we've got some kids' toys out down here, there might be some stacked up rubbish down there. Now, this is not an indicator to say that we shouldn't be planting trees here or that there are any particular issues. That just may be a bit of temporary storage, but things like this also can give a bit of indication about the sense of ownership of a local space, how people feel about those places. And we have tended to find that where you have, you know, less feeling of ownership of a particular space, that we tend to find higher incidences of vandalism. So while we would perhaps want to try and plant trees with the least amount of infrastructure around them in terms of stakes and guards and all those sorts of things, because they're just another thing to maintain their additional costs, sometimes it's essential to put guards on trees in locations where we think they might be more prone to being vandalised. It doesn't necessarily go hand in hand, because there are some very, very affluent areas where I know we've put street trees in and the local residents have come out and cut the tops off because they don't want the tree out the front of their house. So it doesn't go that just because there's some sort of signs of like this in there, that there will be other issues, but it's something to be considered. So yeah, so that's that part there. Then the other part of this, I suppose, is looking at what we need to do when we go out on site. So although there's a certain amount of work that we can do from desk-based assessments, we still need to go out and ground truth these sites. And that's something that hopefully we can start to pick up over the summer if we can find a series of locations and people are happy to go out and do a bit more of an on-site check for us. We'll be using that information to build up our planting site database for this coming winter. So the first thing will be, once we've done our desk-based assessment, is a visual check on that site that that desk-based info is correct. Has there been any changes to the environment? Are there any obvious service runs that we didn't pick up? And what are they? It may be that when we get out on site, it wasn't obvious that there was, you know, a big gas main or something through there, which we wouldn't want to be planting at the top of. So that might rule that location out. As with everything, is there any evidence of community ownership or options for engagement? Where's the nearest school, community group? Is there options to get them involved in either the planting of those trees or engage them in some ongoing establishment work? We're going to try and do what we can to ensure that these trees are watered through the first few years, but if we can get local community groups involved in watering those trees, or the local or the neighbours, then that's going to be great. Some of you might have seen that on Twitter or Facebook, we've also got a series of please water me tags now that we're putting out on trees. So anything that's in a residential area like this, we're putting those tags on to try and encourage people to either put a bit of the washing up water or harvested rainwater on those trees when we've got times of drought. I noticed going around the city yesterday that, you know, we've had a few weeks or whatever it's now, fairly dryish, warm weather, and a lot of the trees are starting to flag in places. You know, these trees are ideally going to need sort of 40 to 50 litres of water every week to keep on top of their water needs, more in times of drought. So every little helps on those. Other things that can often be picked up when you're out on site are soil issues. So, you know, is there sparse grass? That could be an indication that that area is heavily used. It might be being driven over. It might be the place where it's used for football or some other use. It may also be heavily compacted, which is why it's sparse, or the fact that it gets flooded in the standing water. And in some circumstances, that piece of grass or soft landscape might not be there. Things change so quickly. You know, people, you know, there's new driveways that are going in. People might have created new car parking areas. Sometimes that piece of land might have been sold off, or, you know, with housing land, sometimes people apply to buy the piece of land next to their house and then incorporate it into their garden, or, you know, put a garage on it. So even though our maps are fairly up to date, sometimes these changes happen and there's a bit of a lag between the mapping and certainly with the Google Maps as well. We might also need to get indication of the soil type and pH as well. In some locations, we might need to dig a trial pit. Those people who've been doing the level 2 ARB will know all about doing trial pits and soil horizons. So we put a little picture over here. So yeah, soil should typically be divided into a number of horizons. So we've got the O horizon, which is you've got humus, so the dead plant material on the top, and the O horizon, which is this loose, partly decayed organic matter, and then you get down into the A horizon, which is the mineral matter with some humus that's been incorporated by soil-dwelling invertebrates, and then we get down through into the subsoils and the unweathered material, the bedrocks down here. So that's usually that is useful information in determining what types of tree you can plant, what their rooting environment's like. But in urban environments, the soils are usually so disturbed that these horizons are not always that present. Just coming on here, we've got obvious indications of previous land use, e.g. demolished houses. If you know anything about the area, or you can find out anything about the area, you know, you might find that the land was once a housing estate and it's just been capped over. That's particularly the case around Ladywood. So any of the sites in Ladywood, the park spaces there tended to have been back-to-back housing. When we go and dig in those locations, you get down about 3 inches through the topsoil, and then you hit the foundations of a basement into which everything was bulldozed. So you can sometimes open up quite large voids. So it's can be a bit risky digging in some of these urban areas as well. But that might give us an indication of if there's something particular about the soil. Is it a lot of made ground? Is it just a mix of soils? Is it heavily compacted as well? So, yeah, that was quite, I suppose, a bit of a quite quick run through there. I see there's some questions in the chat we'll come to. But these are the sorts of factors that we need to be considering when going out and doing considering sites for tree planting locations. What we said we'll do is the next session we're going to be out in the field to run through actually doing some tree planting site assessments. We're going to be picking an area where we are going to be planting trees this winter, so we're actually going to be gathering data that's useful for us. And then if people think that they'd be happy to undertake some site surveys for us over the course of the summer and feedback that data, that's going to be great. That's going to sort of help us a little bit in formulating our planting plan and identifying where these trees that we know we're getting are going to go. So we've got a list of trees, 240 trees, different species. We need to be putting those out into locations this winter. So we'll be matching trees to locations and doing that. Right. Okay.
Great, Simon. There are some questions in the chat if you're able to answer some of them.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
I'm going to.
The first one was about street trees and the costs of putting those in. But can we include site assessments for street trees, or is it just on sort of residential areas?
I think at the moment we've got a series of maps that cover council-owned land, which is either parks or housing, and probably a little bit of education land. There are around 600 potential planting locations there. So we're going to try and pick out those ones that fall within those priority neighbourhoods out from that. I think, yes, we will be going to start at some point to look at street tree locations. For this winter, it's not something I was going to prioritise on because we've got to do some work around the commuted sums, so that the revenue funds that are needed to maintain those trees. Because at the moment, if the city didn't have a process of replacing the street trees that are lost, then we'd be storing up locations we could plant, and we'd have some money associated with that already for covering those costs. But anything that we'd be adding new to the highway is going to have some additional sums on it. That's something that we're going to be working on over the next 12 months. So trying to come to a suitable level, a suitable figure for adoption. But yeah, we will be doing that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There was another question, and it was about consultation with residents, and you did touch on it when you talked about kind of vandalism and things, but it would seem that would be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the, I'm not saying at this point we need to go out and knock on everybody's door, but I think, yes, if we can get an indication of if there's community groups that we can engage with, that's going to be a good start. And as Justine knows, the work that we've done with schools and community groups has been invaluable. I think if we go and ask everybody individually, you're probably going to get as many people say they don't want any trees as they do want trees. But I think that's a conversation to have when we've got a bit more certainty about whether we can actually plant those areas. So for this first stage is actually, are we able to plant the area at all? Is there anything that's going to stop us planting? And then once we know that we've got those firmed up, as we start to look to plan these in, we'll see who we can engage with and start that conversation at that point.
Okay, yeah, no, that's good. I guess for some people, like the picture that you showed where it's a communal area, it might be that's a space where everybody goes and sunbathes in the summer, or that's a place where all the kids play football. And so to kind of come along and just bung in some trees, you're kind of destroying some of that community cohesion.
And I think that's definitely something that we come across, and it is one of these things that has to be balanced. So, we've had this conversation previously about all the numbers of local authorities that have set, numbers of trees to plant. They'll set a figure and then realize that they don't have enough land. We know that we're going to have to find that balance, that we have to balance it between open space for recreation, open space for, not just people walking, sunbathing, picnicking, because people will want to do that, but also what are the other priority habitats there. So when we get into some of the natural spaces, should actually we be prioritizing the grassland or the wetland? Because if we plant out across the wetland, it's going to dry it up, we're going to remove that habitat. So it's always going to be a balance. It's about trying to find these. And again, like you say, in these urban areas, that might be the first place where the kids go and play football. Sometimes that's obvious when you actually get on the ground, you can see that happens. And so we sort of go, okay, we'll rule that space out. It's about getting the data to get the best sort of information we can. Like I said, the stuff we've been doing with BTFL up until now has mostly been in parks, sites, and the larger housing areas. It's getting difficult now. We're having to go into smaller areas. So it's always going to be a little bit more sensitive.
Yeah, no. So Kevin's just asked, it kind of links into that about minority groups in the areas being engaged, and how would we do that? But I guess, is that through linking up with local community groups and places of worship? And
yeah, it will be. I mean, obviously, we've already had some engagement with one or two mosques, and again with BTFL, we've had quite a bit of engagement with various community groups across the city. Some who've got quite extensive networks. I know Natural England are currently starting a project around diversity and inclusion within, I suppose, BME groups and the natural environment. So there's a lot of work that can be picked up from there, from past working, from any contacts that you have, because obviously, as people who are based out in your own local communities, you probably have a better knowledge of who the active groups are in those areas than, say, the city council does, or certainly I do. I have a reasonable overview, but you don't know some of the smaller groups that can get engaged in these. So this is where we're relying on people's local knowledge to try and pick up on that information.
Okay, that's great. There was there was a point about when you said about pear trees, and just sort of said ornamental pears. There's a lot being planted in Coventry because they don't fruit.
Yeah.
And then she's also said it costs about £50 per site to check the services. Is that right?
That's probably, I suppose, when you add everything up, if you're going out to do once, if you ask say a council officer or a member from our highways team to go out and do a site check, if we were just to do that as a one-off, that's probably about right. Because if you think about the cost of the piece of equipment, their time, their desktop survey, they've got to travel to the site, they've got to check the site, they've got to write a report. When you break it down, actually £50 doesn't sound a lot, because because it's going to take you maybe an hour to do all of that, and an hour's wages with on costs and equipment and everything like that. But if you're being charged, if you've got 15 or 20 sites all down one road and they're charging you £50 per site, is that reasonable? So I can see perhaps why Anne might think that it's not reasonable. If you're saying, actually, want you to come out and check 10 sites all in one run, a one-off, I would perhaps maybe expect that. I think that's that's where we're looking. If we're getting into the highways, we probably would be looking to work with the likes of Kia, who are doing the highways, and get them to do some site checks. They already have a lot of data in terms of where service runs are anyway, as does the council. We already have a lot of that information in place. Some of the information is available free if you create an account with people like Severn Trent and Western Power. You can get some of that information already out of those systems as to where service runs are. But I will say that, as we've found numerous times when we go to dig somewhere, it's not always that it's in that exact location, and sometimes there's something there that they don't remember that they've put there. So I was just talking to a group the other day about trying to get some trees in on Broad Street. we knew that there was about 10 or 15 service runs in a particular area, but when we opened up the ground, there were 21. So those other ones weren't marked on a map. They had no idea that they were there. So, you never know quite what's there. But this is where, having something like a CAT scanner is quite useful, because you can just go out and do it yourself.
Do you think we should buy a CAT scanner then?
Well, I was actually going to try and see whether I could wangle something out of either Kia or Transport for West Midlands. They're a couple of £100, you get a bit of training on it. It's always quite useful, even as a last minute check before you actually start to dig the ground, even if you leave it to that point. We did that recently with the trees in Perry Park. We actually went out and CAT scanned every single location before we opened that up. So we had the service plans, but we needed to pinpoint where the cables were and the pipes were in the ground.
Right.
It does look a little bit weird, walking around. If you see the people at the side of the street with like a long sort of grey sort of box sweeping the ground, that's a CAT scanner.
Right, that sounds good. So I've got another question about who will be able to access the information about who owns bits of land in the urban environment. Is that just something the City Council can access, or can other people access it?
It's initially, I think, for what we're looking at, most of the locations that we'd be asking people to go out and check will already have done that basic bit of information. We'll have an idea of who owns that. The council, like I said, we already have all the data about the land that the City Council owns, but anybody could check a piece of land if it's registered with Land Registry. There is a thing about a £2 to £3 charge per survey, but if somebody was really desperate, then you can do that. But for this process, obviously we are in partnership with the council, so we'd use the council's information to identify those. If, for example, though, you were in Bourneville, you'd be able to get some information from Bourneville Village Trust, or again, if you're in Edgbaston, from the Calthorpe Residents Association or Calthorpe Estates, if there was something occurring in those areas. But Calthorpe has very little public open. Calthorpe Estate has very little public open space relatively to the size of it, even though it's so leafy. So.
Okay, and we're focusing on the areas, the wards where we want to get in some extra trees, really, aren't we, as well?
Absolutely. So, unfortunately, Steve, Calthorpe doesn't feature highly in that at the moment.
It doesn't. And just saying, the bit about the CAT scans, if we did the scans ourselves, would that be accepted, say, by Severn Trent, if we then kind of dug through one of their things by accident? Or, I mean,
to be fair, I mean, things like Severn Trent, and that really, most of the services should be below the 300, 450 mil that we would need to dig to install trees. So it really is unlikely that we're going to hit that. It's not like we're going to be going in with an excavator. If we're putting trees in, we're going to be using a spade. Okay, you might cut through, some of this fiber optic cable or something like that if it hasn't been laid correctly. But then that's often down to the service provider not having done what they're supposed to. The set distances below the ground that things should go in, they've not always done it right. But
I have to say, Simon, in my house, I think the family would rather not have water than not have Wi-Fi. So they would be really upset about fibre optics going on.
I would imagine it would. Yeah, I would imagine it would. But yeah, I mean, I think, I was going to say just on there. I mean, I did some tree planting with Trees for Cities a while back. They brought their own CAT scanner out. They scanned a little bit of an area. This was something that they were doing with a company that was repurposing telephone boxes. I can't remember exactly what it was about now. And there are a few other groups out there as well that have done that, used CAT scanners. Really, it's a last check to be doubly sure. Always, if you've got your utilities plans, that's always a good point. And then it is about just pinpointing some unknowns or just being precise about where it is, because on the mapping, it could be a metre or two's difference on the map. So it's just about that final on the ground bit.
Right.
But yeah, I would have thought. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, that's been Really good. And I think, you know, I'm certainly interested to have a go at, I think you called it ground truthing. So when would you like volunteers to kind of come and help do that? I think, is it the 2nd of July, or have I just made that up?
No, because we did put a date in and it wasn't too far away, wasn't it? Yes, if that was the next one on our list. So where's my calendar? Hang on, June, July. Yeah, 2nd of July. Yeah, so 2nd of July we got in for, it was Saturday. We were just sort of doing maybe an hour and a half somewhere on site. I'll think of a location in the next couple of days to go to, find something where we've got a reasonable amount of space, reasonable parking, fairly central for us all. And then what I'll do is I'll create a check sheet for these, so that if anybody wants to pick any of these up, we can find some locations, we can create some check sheets, and then we can start to gather the data on those. And that's going to be really useful for us when we get to sort of October time when we start needing to plant.
Okay, that would be great. So will you just sort of let us know, and we'll I'll email out to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so 2nd of July then, Saturday, for anybody who wants to get involved in ground truthing, and it'll probably be central East Birmingham, those kind of wards that came up as red areas. Yeah. Okay.
Honest Jenny's particularly desperate for us to go over her way, because I think she put Bromford and Hodge Hill was ranked worth on those sheets.
I mean, that might be a really good place to start. It's up to you.
Well, we'll have her. Oh, she can't do the 2nd of July though, so we'll have a look.
Okay, thanks, Jenny.
We'll find somewhere. We'll find somewhere suitable. It might be somewhere around sort of Ladywood Way or something, somewhere just outside the clean air zone, in case anybody doesn't want to drive into it. Okay,
no, that sounds great. I also wanted to say that we're doing street tree surveying, and we're going to do, anybody who's been trained as a street tree surveyor or wants to have a go. I think if Nina's on the call, I think we've got a session coming up where we're going to do neutrals as a mass survey, where we're all just going to go out and blitz neutrals ward. But embarrassingly, I can't remember the date. Simon, do you know? I've got the 26th of June I've got 2 in my diary, or the 10th of July.
It's Nina. It is the 26th of June.
Fantastic.
We're going to see if that works, and then we were going to book some other dates depending how we manage.
Right, so that's next Sunday. So any of the volunteers who want to get involved in street tree surveying, there'll be a bunch of us who've already been trained. And do we know kind of where and when we're meeting yet, Nina?
No, I was going to have a look at it this afternoon and pick a point and just email it out to everybody.
Fantastic. Okay, that's really good. So just email me if you're interested in doing that on Sunday the 26th of June as well. And that's Neutrals Ward, because we want to get around and do all of that. I'm just having a look in the chat, and Jenny says happy to be involved in the future, and they've got a green spaces coordinator who works in her area. I won't finish
typing now, because I was just typing to say yes, we've had contact with their green spaces coordinator, and I think it's their green spaces coordinator, certainly somebody within that group. I've had ongoing involvement with some of the groups within there, around the church group and the community groups there, and we have passed on some of those please water me tree tags as well, so they can put those on some of the trees that they've been planting around the area. So we've already got a bit of contact in there, so that's good.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think in some places,
Kath. Yeah.
Right. Deanne says that she's got she can get hold of long tape measures. Yes, please. That would be good.
Tape measure on a wheel. Yeah.
That'd be lovely. And can street tree wardens get water me tags? Kevin's asking.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I have some. typically they don't quite fit in an envelope properly, so they have to come out in a big A4 envelope. But yeah, if you yeah, the idea of these, Kevin, was I passed them on to Kath over there to plant on, to put on some of the trees that were in the sort of communal areas and around by residential areas. So if you've got some recently planted street trees or anything around by you that are close by, yeah, we can pass you some tags on to go onto those. We did give some tags out to our street tree surveyors as well. So anybody who's going out doing street tree surveying, if they came across a new tree, they'd just stick a tag on. So yeah, you've got my email address. So just ping me your address and I'll put some in the post.
Oh, that's great. That's lovely. And we'll have some of those with us on the 26th, won't we, for when we're doing the street tree surveys in Neutral. So if anybody's there.
Yeah, I can bring some on the 2nd of July as well. So yeah, just in case anybody wants to pick any up. So okay. I think I've got something like about, I think I've got about 1,000 or 2,000 here, something.
That's brilliant. Lovely. Okay. So lots of things coming up then. So 26th of June in Neutral's doing street tree surveying. 2nd of July doing ground truthing at a location as yet to be decided. And then we'll have some other things as well happening over the summer. I think we're going to do a tree ID session on the 16th of July. That's what we've got in the diary for that, because we've not done much tree IDing recently. And it'll be so nice to do tree ID with things with leaves on. I'm very excited about that. That would be good. Right, okay, so the next hour is, oh, well, I should say thank you so much for that, Simon. That was really interesting.